At just 18 years old, Jesse Crosson was sentenced to 32 years in prison, nearly double the recommended guidelines for a robbery and a non-fatal shooting committed while deep in addiction. What happened next is one of the most powerful second chance stories you'll ever hear. While behind bars, he earned a college degree, became a licensed electrician, mentored countless men, and completely rebuilt himself from the inside out. After serving 19 years, he was granted a conditional pardon and walked out determined to help others and do the same. Today, he's the founder of the Second Chancer Foundation and a best-selling author of The Best Part of Prison, and someone who's reached millions with an honest, no-filter message about accountability, growth, and redemption. Please, guys, welcome Jesse Crosson. All right, Jesse. So tell me, where were you born and about your childhood?
Born in Charlottesville, Virginia, in Central Virginia area. I was the child of two people who had a shared love for substances. Met basically around those substances. Didn't necessarily look that way on the outside. Had normal lives or professional lives on the outside, but definitely had some chaos on the inside, and did the best they could with me. Had some kind of demons they had to deal with, and both ended up getting clean when I was young. When I was two, were together until I was about seven, and then got divorced. Was kind of rocky there for a while. They get split when I was seven, and then both found new partners within 6 months, and so lived in the country. Was an only child. I had a half sister, but she wasn't around much after I was five. So basically, was alone trying to figure things out, or bounced between my mom and dad's house and dealing with their dynamics, and kind of trying to find my place, which I think we're all doing to some degree. Was good at school. Kind of acted up though. Was always in trouble. Always trying to figure out exactly how I was going to relate to people or what I was going to do with my time. Looking for something outside of myself to make me feel whole. Whether that was even at a young age, like girls or substances or something. And then, as I had the opportunity, got into like more trouble or into, kind of more problems. So again, whether that was around substances or people I was spending time with or things I was doing, just kind of like dug myself in a deeper hole until everything went wrong.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of like similarities between like our kind of our the beginning of my life was a little like that too. I have a half sister, it's 11 years older than me, and my parents split when I was 6. My mom, she had like a bad pain pill habit and stuff, and that put us in a lot of sketchy predicaments, and then got me into that life as well. But this next question is, so when you started using substances, did it start with just smoking and stuff and then escalated eventually to, you know, the habit that made everything happen?
Yeah. Yeah, I started like a lot of people did, just with drinking and smoking. I didn't start until I was older. Now I was around it, but basically really didn't start until I was 16. And stayed doing that for a couple of years. Thought that was enough. Experimented with some other things, but nothing really got out of control. But then when I found cocaine, it was just like a light switch. It went from experimenting with something, doing things, to basically within a matter of months, losing my mind, committing a shooting, committing a robbery, driving down the road, like having this whole gangster mentality, and ended up locked up, ended up arrested, where I pleaded guilty to 12 felonies.
Yeah, the same. Like I had a similar thing. I was gonna ask you before the shooting and the robbery happened. What was your plan? What was your ambitions before all this took place? What would you have wanted to do if the shooting wouldn't have happened?
I wanted to go to school for hotel and restaurant management. That was my dream, was being a hotel manager or restaurant manager in like Costa Rica or in some beautiful place in the world, or even just some like cool city that I'd never been to. I wanted to use it as a chance to learn and to travel and to meet people and interact. I had other ideas about maybe one day going to college or being a counselor or doing something professional, but my younger idea, my idea that I stuck with at that point, was that I wanted to do hotel and restaurant management. I wanted to find a way to, like I said, meet people and see the world and have experiences.
Yeah, that was one of the things I think I didn't hear a lot of people ask that question. But obviously you said things really ramped up. If you want to walk us through what happened in the robbery and in the shooting,
Yeah.
that'd be cool.
Basically, when I started doing cocaine, it made me feel like everything was good or everything was okay for the first time. And then the longer I did it, the more paranoid I felt, the more unsure I felt, the more I felt like I needed something to keep me safe. So when somebody offered to sell me a gun, I immediately bought one. And then when somebody offered to sell and we ended up just, loaded down with all these guns and all this paranoia and always looking over our shoulders. And then one night we had run out of cocaine. We'd run out of money. We ran out of options. We didn't know where we were going or what we were doing. My co-defendant sat me down and sat the rest of us down and said, "Hey, I used to work for this family, and they're really bad people, and they take advantage of people. And if we steal from them, it's not really like stealing from people. It's like stealing from crooks. So it's not really a bad thing."
Justified it, kind of.
Yeah. And we did. We justified every bit of it. And I don't know whether any of that was true. Like I have no reason to believe any of it was true, but it was what he said that allowed him to do it. Is what we heard that allowed us to feel like it was okay or to justify doing it. So we went and we thought it was just going to be a burglary. We were going to wait until everybody was gone. We were going to go in. We were going to grab all this money. He said there was going to be this big bag of cash. We're going to take that and we're going to leave, and it was going to pay all our bills or get us more cocaine or all the things we were looking for. First, we went there and there were people there, and then we kind of freaked out and left and went around the back. And then all the cars were gone, so we thought we were fine. So me and another guy went to go break in downstairs. One guy was staying outside. The other one went out front. And when the guy knocked on the front door, thinking nobody'd be there, a maid answered. So again, no cars, so we didn't think anybody was there. He stuck a gun to her face, took her, tied her up, basically put this woman through hell. And we're downstairs not realizing this is happening, thinking he's going to like let us know or yell or do something if anybody's there. So we're going through the house thinking nobody's there.
Waiting for a
Not,
signal.
basically, yeah, not realizing that just what was going to be a burglary, what we thought was going to be a property crime, turned into a robbery, turned into a person interaction that was a danger, that involved a firearm, that involved everything. And then we left, and I don't think I even understand then. I don't remember when he finally said that there had been somebody there. I don't remember how long it was because it was such a haze of drunken, crazy, not sleeping, just the insanity of drug use. It wasn't. I don't think I really got a good picture until I saw it on the news when I was arrested, and I was like, "Oh crap, this and this happened, or these things were alleged to have happened." And it was kind of like piecing together a puzzle from like a nightmare or from a bad dream, like a movie. Because I didn't remember exactly what I had done or what I'd seen. I definitely didn't remember what he had told me, or it didn't match up. And it was putting all those things together and realized that we had traumatized this person. We had traumatized this family. We had caused all this harm, all for this money that wasn't even there in the first place.
Yeah, but so you weren't the shooter? Like,
So the robbery and the shooting were two separate things.
okay, my bad. That's what I was
Yeah.
misunderstanding. Sorry. So
Yeah.
the robbery was with the maid and stuff. I remember you talking about that. But yeah, that had to be a traumatic moment, and I could see how your friend, when you have friends like that, you trust them and stuff. So but what was your mindset, after that had happened? After the robbery had happened, was it like intense paranoia?
Yeah, I was paranoid. I felt guilty. I felt worthless. We hadn't even gotten the money we thought was there. We hadn't even like done what we set out to do. So all it felt like we did was ransack a house or harass people or break people's peace. And I remember just feeling really bad about myself, or not feeling good about myself. And that's when we were all sitting around and we had found somebody else to borrow money and borrow more cocaine from, somebody we didn't owe more money to or wasn't already after us. We were sitting around drinking and trying to get high and trying to think it would like make us feel better, be back like the old days when it was a party. And one of my buddies got a phone call and he started panicking. I could see the look on his face. And it was his girlfriend. And she said there were two guys in his trailer. They wouldn't leave, that they were threatening her, that they were saying all these crazy things, and that, she was scared and she needed help. So they got on the phone and he got on the phone. And finally I could see he just didn't know what to say. So I grabbed the phone and thought I could be the hero. I was the bad guy in the robbery. I felt like the bad guy in so many parts of my life that maybe I could be the good guy in this, or I could be the hero in this. So when I found out they were at the trailer and they wouldn't leave, I said, well, they needed to leave or else there were going to be problems. We kind of threatened each other back and forth. We had the shouting match and we agreed to meet. Just a couple kids full of testosterone thinking we were being tough. End up doing that. End up setting a meeting point. Go through this whole adventure, and then it's up that I'm in a parking lot when they pull up. So these two guys pull up, and it finally hits me after all the buildup and all the planning and all the insanity. Like one of us is gonna die. Like I've got a gun because they stole a gun to sell to my buddy who sold to me. Like they have a gun because they've been stealing guns and selling guns. So like one of us is gonna die. So I got back in my truck, I took off, and they chased me. And I remember just thinking, just let me leave, man. Like I know it's my fault I went there, but just let me leave. Like please, just let me leave. Like let's not do this. and they were riding along in the left lane, swerving like they were going to run me off the road and going back and forth. And I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I'm running away for my life. And then at one point, I remember looking over, and the passenger reached around behind him, going into the back of the car, and I thought he was going for a gun. So I grabbed the gun out of my belt and I just unloaded. I only really remember pulling the trigger once. Like I just remember this flash of pulling the trigger and then realizing the gun was empty and looking down and not understanding where all the bullets had gone or why the slide was cocked back and dropping the gun and then looking over and realizing the car wasn't beside me anymore and not knowing what was happening. And it was just like flashes from a film, like almost like individual scenes. And then I remember the flash of like all this emotion hitting me because I was numb. I was in shock. I had the gunshots in the closed area. You know, I had the flashes. I didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah, you probably couldn't hear for a minute too.
Yeah, well, I remember when the radio finally kicked back in. You know, the windows were down. I was sitting there smoking cigarettes and listening to music, but I didn't hear anything. And then all of a sudden, the music started crashing back in because I guess my hearing came back. And yeah, it was surreal because it felt like I had just gone through something terrible and not realizing I had done something terrible.
So was that when so tell me, was that the thing you were picked up on the next day?
So
So
we were picked up
I
on
was
both the next day.
oh, okay, because I was gonna say, walk me through the time, of that happening to when you got arrested.
And like I said, we were so strung out and so, we weren't sleeping. Days and nights were blended together. I think it was 2 days between the robbery and the shooting. And then it was that we went back and we ended up like crashing or kind of aggravating. We were all staying in one guy's house in this one bedroom apartment, like five of us sleeping on the floor. Um, and we thought, okay, we got to get out of here. Like this has gone bad. So I remember the next morning, somebody called me and said, "Hey, you're on the front page of the newspaper. Like I saw you on the news. I heard you on, like, what are you doing? You got to get out of town. They're going to get you." And so we thought, okay, we got out of town, but we didn't think they would actually realize who we were or figure it out. They'd had a description of me and my truck and the clothes I was wearing, but thought, oh, well, I'll just take my co-defendant's car. And then that way they won't know it's me. They'd never be able to figure that out. And so we had this plan. Me and one of my co-defendants, we were going to go out west. He said he could get us a sailboat in LA and we could go down to El Salvador and we could start over. And again, all this was insanity. We didn't have any money. We didn't have a plan. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know where we were going to sleep that night. We were just like running on adrenaline and no plan, no idea, no anything. And all we were doing was basically hurting everybody we ran into contact with. We were just like causing harm to ourselves and to everyone around us.
No, yeah, I've been definitely like when life just seems like a crash and burn mentality. So when you did get arrested, what happened?
So we were in the house. We were supposed to be taking off to go out to LA so we could steal a sailboat and go to. And I had fallen asleep. I remember I was in the bathroom, and we went from having all this cocaine and partying and sharing and being on top of the world to like I'm hiding in the bathroom so I can take a little bump because I don't want to share with anybody because I only have a little bit left.
I've been
Remember,
there.
I was shaking so bad. I remember I just peed. I was shaking so bad. I was trying to get a bump out, and I dropped the Coke into the toilet that was full of piss. I was like, well, so I grabbed it, and it was wet, and it was soaked in piss. But I was thinking, okay, well, I can cook it up in the crack. Like, I got this. But I didn't do it right then. I couldn't do it right then. So I took the bag, I wrapped it back up, stuck it in my pocket. I walked out. I was pissed that I dropped the Coke. So I remember we had a bottle of liquor on the table. I just grabbed it and turned it up. And I sat down, and without realizing, I just fell asleep. So I went from all this plan getting out the road to not realizing I was asleep. And I only woke up when one of my co-defendants came running through, La policía está fuera, la policía. And I look and realize, like, I don't know what's going on. It's later in the day. And I
Yeah.
ran back and got a gun. And my other co-defendant got a gun. And then we looked at each other and we realized the cops were actually out there. And we didn't want to play shootout anymore. We didn't actually want to die. So we ended up putting the guns down. He ran out the bottom. I ran out the top and ran right into the barrel of an assault rifle.
Yeah. I smiled for a minute though because the thought of cooking up the piss crack, like that that's not funny, but like in a way, like I've been there. It sucks, but yeah, it's crazy the lengths you'll go to. When you got arrested, what did your family say?
I didn't know at first. I didn't, I was terrified. I didn't want my family to find out. I thought, okay, I'm in jail. At the first, I was so relieved because I had shot two people and I thought I had killed them. I thought I had murder charges. Like, I thought that's what I was being arrested on. So when I got arrested and I was charged with malicious wounding, I was like, damn, they live? Like, I think I may even said that to the officer. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, like, okay, like, I'm not a killer. I'm not a murderer. And so I was relieved at that. But I remember sitting there and staring at the phone when I was in lockup. I did my 1 or 2 days in R&D, just like waiting for detox. And then I'm sitting in the dorm or in the pod, And I'm looking at the phone and I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to call home. I didn't think my parents knew. I was like, man, they're gonna be sitting there having dinner and they're gonna get this call. I didn't realize I was on the front page of the newspaper. That everybody in the community knew about me. That I was on the front page. I was on the news. I was on, like, everybody knew about this. And my parents had been worried sick because they hadn't heard from me. But so when I called, I remembered expecting them to be angry, expecting them to be just be done with me, never want anything to do with me. And instead, I heard my dad feel really guilty. And he blamed himself and he said, yeah, this is my fault. I brought you into this. I talked about this. Like, this is my fault. And my mom was just trying to fix things. She was always a fixer. She never really knew how to, like, hold space or just be with things. So she was telling me, like, I talked to a lawyer and I'm trying to figure out how to get you out of this, and we're going to figure it out and it's going to be okay. But I could feel how out of control she was and how out of her mind she was. And she was trying to tell me she loved me or that it was okay, but all I heard was her panic. And I just hated myself more because I knew I had caused that panic. That, like, if it hadn't been for me going through this, if it hadn't been for her getting that call or seeing me on TV or hearing from friends, she would have been okay. But because of what I did, she was panicked and out of control.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. And my mom was the same way. Every time like I got locked up or something, she was always trying to fix things. And I could only imagine, your son is being accused of, this horrible crime. And yeah, it probably felt at the time, were they the only people in your corner when you had got arrested?
And initially I didn't know anybody was in my corner or what it was, but initially I talked to them on the phone, and I got a letter from them, or I think my mom sent me a money order at one point because I didn't have any money on the books, and then I got another letter, and then I ended up getting this broad support from the community, from people who'd known me in school or people I'd done volunteer work with when I was a kid, or it ended up being amazing because all these people kind of saw me as like a cause to circle around, or like this person to believe in, or this thing to help with. And I actually did feel seen and supported in a way that I didn't understand. And then I hated myself for that because I would sit there and I would get mail and I would watch other guys who lined up every day at the desk, hoping they would get mail, hoping somebody would call their name and never getting it, and thinking, like, I don't deserve this. Like, I don't deserve this. This guy is just as deserving of mail as I am. And I hated myself because I was getting that support when so few guys were.
Yeah, no, but that's awesome that you did get that, My next, so between, your first like court dates, what was your outlook? What did you think was gonna happen? Were you just like settling in, like, I'm done, like this is it?
I mean, I thought, again, when I was arrested, I thought I was going down for murder. I thought I'd killed people and I was never coming out. When I found out it was malicious wounding, I still thought it was bad. And when I went, the magistrate didn't give me a bond, and then we went to a bond hearing, and the judge was clear. He's like, "There's no way in hell I'm letting you out. I don't care what they like. You're not going anywhere." Because initially I thought, okay, I'll get arrested and then I'll get a bond and I'll be able to, like, either go on the run or go work. I had a bunch of ideas, but when it became clear that they were not going to let me out, that this was it, I just kind of settled in because I couldn't imagine a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20. It just didn't seem possible. So I just kind of felt stuck. And also, I felt like I had holes in my brain. I remember getting back there and trying to read for the first time when I was in the jail. And I would read a word and I would read a sentence and I would just lose it. It didn't matter how many times I read it. I couldn't hold it in my brain. I couldn't process. And it felt like there was just something functionally wrong with me. And it took months before I could read a paragraph and actually understand what I was reading. It took months before I could have an intelligent conversation. It was like I had poisoned myself so much with cocaine, with the alcohol, with the craziness, that I just felt like I stopped functioning.
Yeah. How did the fact that the victim survived shape how you process the responsibility of it and the
It,
sentence?
well, again, I was grateful, one, that they survived just because I didn't want to kill anybody. I didn't want anybody to die. And two, because I thought, okay, well, this means, I'm not going to get a life sentence. I'm not going to face it. And initially the sentencing guidelines called for 8 to 13 years. And I said, okay, like that, I can deal with that. A midpoint of 10 years. And my lawyer sat me down and he was like, Jesse, I know this isn't easy, but you did some really bad stuff. Like, you got to own up to it. You got to wear that, and you're going to have to spend 10 years in prison. And I needed that because having somebody laid out that way rather than all the justification I heard around me in the jail was like, okay, yeah, I did some bad stuff. I can deal with this. I'm gonna do my time and I'm gonna be okay. And then the day of sentencing, the first motion was by the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth made a motion to modify the sentencing guidelines. So all of a sudden, after the modification, instead of 8 to 13 years, it was 10 to 16 or 10 and a half to 16 and a half years with a midpoint of 13 and a half. And I was like, oh, so well, 13 and a half, like, but I could do 10, I can do 13 and a half. Like, I can deal with that. And then when I got sentenced, he listed out all the charges. I had 12 felonies I pleaded guilty to. And judge started saying like 20 years with 10 years suspended and 5 years with 5 years and down the road. And I was doing the math in my head, but it didn't make sense to me because I thought I was going to get 10 years. And I thought I heard, and sure enough, at the end, my lawyer asked the judge, how much time is that? Like, how much did you give him? And the judge said, I don't know. I just told you. And so the stenographer had to read back the sentence and go through everything and say, no, that's 138 years with 106 suspended, or an active sentence of 32 years in prison.
Yeah, Virginia's always on some like trying to hang somebody. But I was gonna so early on, what was the initial feeling when you're coming back from getting that news? That you're looking at doing this 100 years, life.
I didn't I didn't know, like, I don't even really remember from the courtroom to the bottom of the jail to the car. I remember, like, in the van, the deputy radioing and saying something like, yo, Jesse just got whopped in the head, or Crosson just got whopped in the head, and getting back to the jail. And the deputy, we had to come back, we had to strip search and go through this whole process. I walked in and he was just like, damn, boy, like, you doing okay? And I looked at him, I didn't know what to say. He's like, hey, you got contraband on you? And I just looked at him. He said, just say yes or no. And I said, no. And he said, all right, look, I'm not going to strip you. Like, man, you already had a rough enough day. And I remember that kind of making it real. I was like, damn, if this dude whose job is to like strip search me and not like is giving me a break, he knows it. Like, it's bad. Then I went back to the block, and then I wasn't back in the block. I was just sitting on my bunk staring at the wall, maybe 5 minutes. And then an officer came in and said, Crosson, pack your stuff. I was like, what to pack my stuff for what? And they take me up, and I don't even know where I'm going. I'm carrying my mattress and pushing my stuff, and they take me up to medical, and they put me on suicide watch because somebody in the jail heard the sentence I got and was like, yeah, he's gonna hurt himself. Like, we got to have somebody on him. So I'm in a glass room where they can watch me 24/7 because they won't, they don't trust me to not hurt myself.
Yeah, the bubble. That's what we used to call it. So, what initially going in there because you're obviously young, and as a man, I know like you're full of testosterone. Did you initially go in like having to fight and stuff before? Because I know later on in your sentence, you go on to do all these great things I want to talk about, like getting the bachelor's degree and doing the mental health work with other prisoners. But before all that, was there ever a time that you were still a young man trying to find your way, but finding yourself in some trouble?
Yeah, and quite a few times. Everybody told me if you get backed into a corner, you're a bad situation. Anybody touches your stuff, anybody tries you in public, you make an example of them. And I was scared. I didn't want to do any of this, but I thought, okay, if I don't fight, or I don't swing first, or I don't do one of those things, it's gonna be worse for me because that's what everybody told me. So there were a lot of situations that could have ended in a conversation, or I could have told people to stop, or I could have done anything, but I fired off on somebody, or I built it up or racked it up into bigger than it was because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, or that's what I thought I had to do. So there were a lot of situations. I got into some fights I really didn't have a choice. I was defending myself, but the vast majority of times it was something I could have walked away from, or I could have talked my way out of. But my reaction was to swing first, or because I was afraid, or I was angry.
Yeah, nah, that's what the OGs always told me. Even if you lose, you still fight. So, when in your sentence did it come about like that you started getting these opportunities to like do the programs and you started taking those seriously?
I was really lucky that, I told you my mom was always a fixer. She had found a college program, and she was like, Jesse, like, you messed up really bad. You lost a lot, but you're going to start this. So early on, I'm getting a stack of books and workbooks and stealth addressed and stamped envelopes so I can send them into the school. And I was able to take a college class. I remember being full of doubt. I was like, I can't take college. Like, I can't even stay out of prison. How the hell am I going to go to college? But it gave me something to do in a place that there wasn't a lot to do. So I remember just like focusing in and doing the best I could and finishing it, and then taking another course and another course. And it was like when I went to the first prison, the first major prison, everybody told me, don't go to mental health. Like, don't go over
Where'd
there.
you
They're going to put some.
Where'd you go? Red Onion? That's my
No, sorry.
guess.
No, I started it at Powhatan Receiving, and they sent me to
Oh,
Nottoway, which was a level 4. So I was 1 point away from being a level 5, and they would have sent me to Sussex. But instead, I was 1 point under, so they sent me to Nottoway, which was a 4 back then. It wasn't a receiving. Um, and I get there, and everybody told me not to go to mental health, not to talk to anybody. They'd put something in my record. It'd be a mark against me. But I was like, man, I blew my life up. I threw my life away. Like, I got to do something. I want help from anybody. And I would have taken help from anybody. So I remember put in for mental health, and I went over and talked to the lady, and she was the nicest lady in the world, Miss Carter. And I kept going back. And so she'd get me back over there every month or every 2 months or sometimes every 3 weeks. And I would talk to her and I'd be like, man, I don't know what do I do? Like, I got 30 years. What am I going to do with my life? And she really helped me. She was one of the first people inside to help me start putting things together. And she would say, hey, why don't you take this program? Or, hey, why don't you take this workbook? I'm going to give you a copy of this workbook, or let me give you this assignment, or was just giving me things to do, because otherwise I would sit around, I'd lift weights, I'd play cards. But if I was doing something, I felt like I was a little more okay, or I felt like my life had a little more meaning or purpose, because sitting around staring at the wall, or like I said, playing cards and lifting weights. And at the end of the day, I just felt empty.
Yeah, and that's honestly like that. I love that's why I wanted to get you on so bad too, is because your story is a testament. There's so many people that spend their life. I've seen it. That spend their whole bid not improving themselves, playing poker. And yeah, I just think that's awesome. So when did the peer support work come in?
It was about 15 or 16 years in. I tutored a lot of people at that point. I'd kind of like built a reputation as like having office hours. Guys would come by my cell to ask questions about school, or just kind of talk through things. If they had a conflict they wanted to talk to somebody about. And one guy came through, and then another one, and they were like, man, we need help stop getting high. Like, everywhere we go, people know we got money, they'll put drugs in our hand. We go down to the hole, somebody's going to put drugs in our hand. Like, we need help stopping. And so I went to one of the other guys in the pod, and we talked about it, and we went to mental health, and we were like, look, man, like, we're not going to give you the details, but like, we got a drug problem. We all know we got a drug problem. Like, what would it look like if we had a place where people who wanted to not be using drugs could be, where they could be like separated from everybody else, where they could actually focus on being clean, where they didn't have to worry about somebody put something in their hands. And the guy listened to us, and he was like, all right, well, let me run it up the chain. Came back to us a couple weeks later, a month later, and he was like, yeah, well, they said we don't have a drug problem in DOC, but we do have a mental health problem. So they're going to give us some funding to do a pilot for mental health or peer support services. So if this person has a mental health problem rather than a drug problem, like, maybe we can help them. Those guys ended up being some of the first residents in the SAM program, the Shared Allied Management Program. They took us, me and the other guy that had gone to the mental health person, and a group of us, and said, hey, do y'all want to be mentors? Do you want to be like peer support? Do you want to get trained to help people in your situation? We all said, yeah. And so we took classes, we watched videos, we did all this stuff under mental health to like be prepared. Then we came in, we organized a system, we organized like games and activities, we organized check-ins, we just built a system basically out of nothing, so that we could check in on guys. And a lot of these guys were the ones who were considered like SMI or SMI2, like generally wouldn't stay out of the hole, or were constantly fighting or hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, or doing other things like gunning
Yeah.
or publicly. And what we found was that they just needed to be heard, or they wanted to be heard, and they felt like nobody was listening. So we would assign one person and to sit down with them, and sometimes it would take 5 minutes, and they'd be like, all right, I feel better, like, you actually like listen to me, that I'm angry or that I'm sad or that I'm scared. And that was it. We didn't get training to be psychologists. Like, we didn't go to like 4 years or 8 years of school. We just listened to them, and the staff didn't have the time to do that. And what we started doing is we were like the intermediaries. So guys would come to us, they would check in with us every day and tell us what was going on or how things were. And then we had access to the mental health staff. So if we had like a pressing concern, like, hey, this guy's doing really bad, like, I'm worried he's going to self-harm, or worried something's going on, they would let us go over there and like download with him and be like, hey, been working with this guy, he's been doing real well, but something came up, like, I'm worried about him, can you check with him, or can you get him away for a little while? They would put him in like kind of like the medical lockup or whatever in the front, where it was just like away from everybody else, so they felt like it was quiet, or it was safe, or let them kind of calm down. Or they would just get him over to the mental health office. And so all of a sudden, these guys who couldn't stay out of the hole in many cases for more than a week, who were constantly getting in trouble or constantly getting into issues, were just stable, and we're like in the pod for weeks and months and years, and we're okay just because somebody listened to them. And it was really gratifying, because I realized that I'd done mentoring, I'd done tutoring, but this was just given the opportunity to like respect a person's humanity. And often they had a different experience than I did. They saw things differently. Like, I wanted everybody to like get an education and change their life. I realized with some guys, man, if we could get them to take a shower every day, that was
Yeah.
it. Like, that was the most we were going to do, but that was a win.
Yeah, no, that's huge, and that's great. A lot of those people just need to be met where they are.
Mm-hmm.
In like the poop throwers.
Yeah.
Just miss that comes from a place of trauma most of the time. But so what was your routine that really helped you stay out of trouble, stay away from gangs and stuff like that?
I had a bunch of different things, but it was just about having a routine. So that may change over the years. But I would usually get up early in the morning. I was usually, you had guys who stayed up late and hollered and, watched TV. Usually be the first one up before breakfast. I'd go to breakfast, come back, use the bathroom. I'd make some coffee. I'd do a reading every day, whether it was a religious text or it was a 12-step text or I was always just looking for different places for inspiration or support or something to connect with. I would do that. I would meditate. I would do
Yeah,
some
I was gonna
writing.
ask about that.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to be introduced to first this crazy kid who I remember I got into a fight. I had this guy who had like a mental health breakdown and literally just attacked me out of the corner. Like I'm sitting there at the hot water pot trying to fill up my coffee. Dude just swings on me and he's yelling about somebody looking in his mirror. Like he was not doing well. End up getting locked up for that, and they let me out because they were like, oh yeah, we actually like everybody said you didn't throw the first punch, you didn't whatever. So I get out, but they don't have a room in that pod, so they move me in a pod across the hall. Here's this like skinny, crazy looking kid with all these tattoos. He was a juggalo. He was into all this shit, and he started talking about meditation. And he started talking about martial arts, and started talking about philosophy. And this kid who was younger than me, who looked crazy, ended up being one of the most influential forces in my life because all of a sudden I realized he knew something I didn't know or understood some things I didn't understand. So I started learning from him. I started practicing the things he was practicing, reading the books he recommended, and doing the meditation he recommended, or the meditation he was doing. And it was a huge shift in my life because for the first time I was slowed down enough to actually like act rather than just react. I was to choose what I wanted to do, choose how I wanted to be. It was a revolutionary thing for me.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. Was did was there any relationships that surprised you as your bid went on?
There were a lot. I mean, early on, the guy who, the older guy who ran the quality control in the factory at Nottoway, who turns out was accused of being a serial killer. Like that blew my mind because he was the uncle character, the avuncular guy who helped me improve my vocabulary. He gave me assignments, who taught me about leadership. He'd won a bunch of medals in Vietnam, who just like shared these experiences. It seemed really valuable. And then I find out later, like how the world knew him was not how I knew him, and that horrified me because he was accused of some pretty awful things, but he was a positive force in my life, and there were a bunch of people like that. And Danny was the kid who taught me how to meditate. There was Carl who taught me kind of about academics. Like he introduced himself as saying that he had a PhD in English, and he had never actually completed a PhD, but he had back when before they took the college away in the system, he had taken college classes, and he had never intentionally graduated, so he could just keep taking classes. So he'd taken like 15 years of college classes and had read on his own and essentially written his own dissertation. And for the most part, like without the actual record, had a PhD in English. It was like one of the most well-read, most philosophical, most thoughtful people I'd ever met because he'd spent 30 years in prison reading and studying and learning and writing and being creative. And I never imagined that. I thought everybody in prison was illiterate or dumb or limited. And I'm realizing there are people around me that were just absolutely inspirational.
Yeah, no, that's huge. My next question is, you lost your dad in there. What was it like processing that, and how did you grieve?
It took me years to even process. Remember my dad, he'd moved out of the country. My dad didn't agree with the stuff that was going on when we invaded Iraq. He said, look, I don't want to be part of an imperial nation. Like, I don't believe in this. He moved down to Costa Rica, had a medical scare, ended up having surgery, went in, had a valve replacement in his heart because my dad had shot cocaine and done craziness for most of his life. So his body was not in good shape. He woke up out of the surgery, was okay, and then just never woke up that next day. Like, went to bed that night and never came back. And it didn't seem real to me because like I hadn't seen him in months or however long it was. I'd gotten to talk to him on the phone the day before the surgery, which was great. They had marched me down, but I kept waiting to get another letter from him because like, well, maybe he wrote a letter before he died. Like maybe it just seemed out of touch with reality, and it never really sank in until I got transferred from Nottoway to Buckingham. And I get there, and I had all these pictures. My dad had sent me pictures from Costa Rica, and he had taken his shirt and his shoes off and just never put them back on. He's wandering around the jungle and climbing and stuff and swimming and stuff. And they took all the pictures of him because they said they were semi-nude pictures because he didn't have a shirt on. And I just lost my mind. I was like, man, this is my dad. He's dead. I don't have anything else of his. I'm never going to get anything else of him. And you're taking these effing pictures. And one of the officers at property actually like looked at me and I saw him nod. And the other officer was like, that's just policy. You got to deal with it, Cross. You know the rules. And he was like slipping pictures out of the pile she was trying to get rid of and like slipping it back in my pile. So I would at least have a couple pictures of him. But yeah, they took most of the pictures, most of the things I had for my dad, and just got rid of them. I think I was able to send them home, but can't remember if it was through visitation or what. And that was when it really hit me that like my dad was gone. And what I felt at the moment was like my dad's gone and it's my fault. Like I couldn't see him, I couldn't go to his funeral, I couldn't help him at his bedside, I couldn't help him with whatever he needed. Like my dad's gone and it's my fault.
Yeah, no, I could understand like that. You would feel like guilty. I feel that way about like my mom in some ways. But yeah, but that that had to be a hard thing to go through. And but I wanted to say, if someone else is in prison and grieving, is there anything that you would like, any advice you would give them?
One of the things that, the book I call the best part of prison, and it's not
Yeah,
that
I
I
was
think
just about
prison,
to ask you that.
I'm not saying that prison is a good thing. I'm saying that everything we face and everything we experience, no matter how negative it feels, is an opportunity. And one of the things prison gave me was the opportunity for time to make space and have time to do whatever I needed to do, to learn, to study, to meditate, to help other people. And so if we're grieving, the only way to get through that grief is to get through it. It's like walking through a mud pit. Like you got to get through it, and it's going to be uncomfortable and you're going to get stuck and it's going to be unsure and you may get lost, but you're never going to get through it if you don't get through it. So one of the things about prison, you have the opportunity to be walking in that mud pit, to sit in that discomfort, to really feel it and let it kind of have its way with you. And once you get out to the world, it's busy and we can push stuff off for years. Like I literally went and picked up, I got a box over here of some of my childhood stuff that after my dad died, my stepmom packed up and it's just been sitting on a porch somewhere for, 20 some years. And so I picked this box up and I'm looking at the stuff that I hadn't seen in more than 20 years. I was like, holy shit. And it brought up memories and some of those I hadn't sat with enough or I hadn't processed enough, I hadn't recognized. And if we don't get to it, it's going to come up. And it's like grief and the emotions we feel are going to build in us. They're like pressure in a pot. If we don't let them out, they're going to build and build, and eventually that pot's going to explode, and that's not good for anybody. But if we can make time to sit with it, we can make time to feel those emotions, make time to blow off the steam, we can get through it a little bit easier and at least avoid exploding at some point.
Yeah, that was a perfect answer. So the book, The Best Part of Prison, what was the inspiration behind that book, and what parts of prison did you use to put it together?
Yeah, so I got out of prison and under radical circumstances, got out, started making videos on social media, not because I even knew what social media was, but because somebody told me, Jesse, you got an interesting story, you need to share it. And I was so institutionalized, I didn't know how to make decisions. I felt like there were too many decisions to make, so I just did what people told me. So somebody told me to start making videos, and I did, and they blew up and went viral, and all of a sudden I got all these followers, and I'm making all these videos, and I actually got offered a book deal the first year I was out. And this company reached out and said, we'd love to have a book, but we want a ghostwriter. We want somebody to really tell your story and really make it pop. And I was like, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with somebody else writing my story. Like that's if I'm going to tell
Yeah,
my story, I want to tell it. So I remember turning that down. But then the next 3 years, I was so busy. I was like, damn, I should have just taken that ghostwriter because I don't have time to do it now. But I was really looking for a point where I wanted to share like a completion. Like, what is the end of this story? And if it's just me getting out of prison, well, I haven't accomplished anything. All I did was survive 19 years. Like, I haven't done anything. So it finally happened that about 3 years out or 3.5 years out, I had that full circle moment, that crazy thing that really fit, that like was the kind of end of the full circle journey. And I had something to write about. And it involved tears and gratitude and all sorts of things. But that was when I decided I wanted to do it. So I reached out. I had a friend who had written a book that had been successful, got an agent, started pitching it, and spent about 6 months writing a book proposal, and shared the stories where I didn't want to share just entertaining stories. I wanted there to be some underlying meaning. I like the idea of Trojan horse, right? So we tell a
yeah,
story about prison that's interesting or that's feels like pressing or emotional to people, but underlying it, there's a message that people can use. Because I didn't want to just like entertain people or scare people. I wanted it to be something that people could apply to their own lives. So I took stories from prison, whether they were my experience or the experiences I saw, and related those to how people could grow or the opportunities people had or how people could approach things in a way that may make them feel better or bigger rather than less or not as good. And so I shared those stories, and it was really neat because I remember the editor being like, Jesse, this is good. And I still didn't know. I still felt like a fraud. I'd felt like a fraud since I got out. I didn't feel like I deserved to be out. And all of a sudden it started kind of coming together. And it really wasn't until I read the audiobook for this. So I'd finished the book, it was already done. And I'm in this studio reading the audiobook. And so it's the first time I sat down and read it all back after I'd written it and submitted it and done it. And I was like, man, this isn't bad. Like this is actually pretty good. And then it started to feel real.
Yeah, no, I'll have to check it out. I've tried putting a book together myself, but I gotta let the statute of limitations run out on some things before I can incriminate myself in a book. That
I
was
get it.
at least what somebody told me after they read it, that I should do. So let's talk about how you only had an hour and a half notice before you got pardoned.
Yeah. So, my sentencing guidelines, like I said, had called for 16 and a half years. So I didn't feel comfortable applying for a pardon or even talking to anybody about a second chance until I'd done that time. So at about 16 years, I started looking at what it would look like to write a pardon, to file the petition, to, do all the process. Started writing, started trying to get letters of support, started to get documentation for programs I'd taken or programs I'd done inside. And at 16 and a half years, once I hit that mark, which is the most the state sentencing guidelines said I should spend in prison, I sent it off. And so this 300-page document gets sent off to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office, and that's basically I forgot about it because 6 months goes by, a year goes by, a year and a half goes by, 2 years go by. 2.5 years later, I get called in the office at Coffeewood, where I've gone in the middle of COVID,
Yeah, I
and
know where that is.
and the phone's off the receiver, and somebody on the other end, somebody I can't see, says, "Mr. Crosson, you sitting down?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" They said, "Because you've been granted a pardon. You're going home today." So I woke up thinking I had 10 years left on my sentence, and somebody in an office told me I was going home, and it just didn't seem real. Like it seemed too big, too scary, too numbing, too everything. And then the next hour and a half was a blur of me like running to the shower and going over to sign paperwork and going to property and going to medical and then walking out, like seeing my mom for the first time in a year and a half because we hadn't had any visits, and then walking outside and the colors seeming brighter and the wind feeling like breezier, if that makes sense. The sun seeming like I
Yeah.
just didn't know how to process.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask is how was the first, week and or first couple days out, especially because you didn't really have that much of a plan.
I didn't have any. I mean, I had been preparing the
You
whole
didn't
time
have
I'd been
time to
inside.
plan. Yeah.
But yeah, I had a lot of ideas, I had a lot of things, but yeah, I was overwhelmed. I couldn't do the basic things. I had a breakdown at Costco the first day. I was overwhelmed every time I walked into a store, every time I walked into a public space. I felt like everywhere I went, I had a sign over my head that said, "This guy just got out of prison." It just, none of it felt real. It just felt impossible. But over time, it got a little bit easier. Like I could function a little bit better in a new environment, or I could function a little bit better in with a new challenge or with a new group of people. And it took time. And next month will be 5 years that I've been out, and it's been a crazy journey. But I'll tell you, the craziest part is this that I got yesterday. Um, so this was apparently signed by the judge on July 16th. But yesterday, I found out that my entire sentence, my entire record has been expunged. So as of yesterday, for the first time
That's
in my life,
huge.
I'm not actually a convicted felon.
Yeah, nah, you could go own a gun if you wanted to.
The number
But
of people who've invited me to a gun range, to a shooting range, since I talked about that yesterday, blew my mind.
yeah, my next question was anybody would have felt institutionalized from being incarcerated that long. What did you tell yourself that kind of helped you stabilize?
I mean, I had a lot of breakdowns. I regularly would just be like shaken or overwhelmed or feel like I needed to run away or panic. And I was grateful that I had studied psychology. I was grateful that I learned about trauma responses, that I learned about the idea that the body keeps a score, that the body will hold on to trauma even when we don't have it mentally. And I'd read a lot about people who'd gone into combat and come back. And one of the things that I found was that a lot of people go into combat, and even in the midst of people getting shot and the chaos and the ground, they managed to like stay calm and stay present and stay okay. And the crazy thing is, once they got out of that combat, once they got to a place that was safe, all of a sudden their body and their mind started releasing all the stuff that they hadn't been able to process at the time. And I realized that this is what happened. I'm basically like dumping inside of myself all the adrenaline, all the fear from the past, all the anger, all the things I couldn't process at the time were finally coming up. And it made sense that I felt overwhelmed because I've been holding on to them for 20 years. I've been like keeping it in myself and acting like it was okay when ultimately it was safe enough to let it out. I had to admit that I really wasn't okay.
No, yeah, that's huge. How did going viral affect your reentry? Because that's that's one of the questions that came up when I was like putting together a thing. I asked I'll admit to this, but I asked ChatGPT a couple things about you, and that was one of the questions it told me to ask
Sure. Yeah.
you.
So I got out of prison. Like I said, I'd had the idea. I was going to get a job. I was going to try to go to grad school. I was going to try to be a counselor, but I'd also got my journeyman electrical license while I was in. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll go do electrical work. I'll just stay where I am. And all of a sudden, I'm going viral on social media, and I was getting speaking requests. Like I said, I had people offering me book deals. I had all these things going on. And so I realized that I didn't want to be stuck in like one 9 to 5 job. I wanted to have options. I wanted to be able to explore. And all of a sudden, my world just got really big. And in a weird way, I had lived in a place with so few options that I thought my goal was to have more options or be able to do more things. And I got to the point where I had so many options, I didn't even know what to choose. Like I had different jobs I could do, I did different people I could associate with, different places I could live, and all of a sudden I was just overwhelmed. And in a weird way, it created so many choices that I just didn't know how to make any choice. And I felt like I was just kind of stuck. I was just like a deer in the headlights.
What did when did the Second Chancer Foundation? When did you start that? When did
That
it
was
come about?
July of 22. So that was a little less than a year out. And that was it was an example. So I'd gotten out, I'd gotten different jobs, and what I realized was every job interview I went into, it was like, oh, once they find out I spent 19 years in prison, are they going to hire me? Am I going to have a chance? And it felt like I was always explaining it, always preparing to explain it. And so I realized that if I went into like a normal job, quote unquote, it was gonna, it was gonna be something I had to explain. But if I worked in advocacy or criminal justice, or I worked in something where all of a sudden it became an asset, well, it was a benefit. It made me more appealing as a candidate. So I started applying for national jobs and nonprofit jobs and advocacy jobs. I remember I was on the sixth round of interviews for this big national nonprofit, and I went to a party. The woman that I was dating at the time had a podcast release party, and I went there, and some guy that I'd never met before started interviewing me and basically just saying, "Hey, tell me about yourself. I want to know." And it's a place full of reporters, so I figured he was a reporter. And then he asked me, he's like, "Well, what do you want to do, and what do you want it to look like?" He took these notes, and he said, "Look, I'm gonna look into this for you." And the next morning, he said, "You know that job you told me about? Don't take it." And he gave me a bunch of reasons why this nonprofit was not a good fit for me, and all these other things. And then he said, "I believe in this so much that I want you to start your own 501c3 nonprofit. Pay yourself whatever that job would have paid you. I will give you seed funding and go do good in the world. Like go do something kind." And that doesn't happen. Like that didn't sit
Yeah, hell
still.
no, that's huge.
It was, and I'll tell you, I felt so much pressure to do right or do well, or like, am I doing enough? This guy believed in me. Have I messed it up? And I was really lucky to about a year and a half ago to have had a couple hours of time with him. I hadn't seen him since. And basically just say, like, what did you see? What did you want? And he had gone into the 990s, like the tax documents for the nonprofit. He had gone into the records. He had asked people. He'd like done a bunch of research, and he said, "Look, man, I made a lot of investments in my life. This is one of the ones I'm really happy about. Thank you." He shook my hand, and felt like I'd done okay. Like I hadn't messed it up or I hadn't thrown it away. And that made me feel good because I've worked with a lot of kids in the juvenile center, worked with a lot of people getting out. And it was like, you know what? It all actually was for the good. It all did come together.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I have two more questions, and then I'll let you go. So what made you decide to start telling your story and to go on the podcast that you've been on
Well,
instead
with
of
social,
keeping it private?
like I said, with social media, it was somebody told me to tell stories, and I did what people told me because I was institutionalized. But it was also that, like I said, I was always worried when I walked into a room, what would people think if they knew who I was, or knew about my past, or knew where I'd been? And I was worried about that. And one of the things I learned in prison is that I could run away from a problem, or I could run headfirst at one. And so that was my approach. I said, look, rather than giving anybody some secret they could hold over my head or some things I feel like I need to minimize, I'm just going to lead with it. And that way, if you don't want to deal with me, don't deal with me. Like I'm save myself the time from trying to impress you or being worried what you think. I'm just going to be who I am. I'm going to be it publicly to the world. And then if people choose to deal with me, they already know who I am. There's no like getting mad that you find out later I was in prison or what I did. And it allowed me to build probably the best relationships and have some of the best opportunities because I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to worry about impressing anybody. I could just be myself all the time, and I got a lot of positive responses from that because people would be like, man, it's really refreshing to hear somebody who's just themselves or who's really accountable or really owns their stuff in a world where everybody's making excuses and everybody's trying to find ways to like weasel out of accountability. And so it was for me, it was a path to freedom. But for other people, I think it was just reassuring.
Yeah, my last question is if somebody else is right now looking at a facing a crime that could potentially affect the rest of their life, would you like, is there a message you would see for them? Because I think there's people out there who felt like you did, facing 32 years. And a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, if I get more than 10, I'm out of here. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's my last question.
So we tend to think of accountability as a bad thing, like, oh, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to have to pay for the things I did. I don't want to be accountable. For me, accountability was the first step to freedom. Because when I really owned the things I did, when I really owned that I had made choices and they were my responsibility and there wasn't anybody to blame but myself, it allowed me to start being accountable and healing and making changes in my life that made me feel better, made me feel okay, made me find ways where I could contribute and I could help other people rather than taking from other people or destroying for other people. And it really was the first step on living a life that I was actually proud of. Because man, the whole time I was doing drugs, the whole time I was running around, I was never proud of myself. I hated myself. I hated my life. I was trying to find the next thing that would make me feel okay, the next drink or the next woman or the next line that would make me feel okay for 5 minutes or 15 minutes. But I was never okay and I was never proud of myself. When I actually started being accountable, when I actually started taking steps to see what was meaningful, to learn, to help other people to grow, all of a sudden I was happy with who I was. I was proud of who I was. I was glad to have the opportunity to go through a day. I had things to look forward to rather than things I felt like I was running from.